can find all our shows at multiformat.net. That was 1 minute at the Multiformat Network.
The information economy has arrived. The world is teeming with innovation as new business models reinvent every industry. InsideAnalysis is your source of information and insight about how to make the most of this exciting new era. Learn more at InsideAnalysis.com.
InsideAnalysis.com.
And now, here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
You're so inclined, you go there in your mind. Welcome to the future right time.
All right, folks, welcome to the future indeed. Yours truly, Eric Kavanaugh here, the only coast-to-coast show that's all about the information economy. It's time for Inside Analysis, and folks, we have an all-star cast for you today and a white-hot topic. We're going to talk about what is responsible AI. Is there such a thing as responsible AI? There are responsible people using AI, setting up AI, coding AI, leveraging AI, but the people have to be responsible. And then how do you enforce that? Well, with rules, with guidelines, with policies, and then with actual enforcement, where people get in trouble when they do bad things, or they're simply not allowed to do things. That's usually the way it's going to be. And we'll talk about that on the show today. We've got wonderful guests. My buddy David Linthicum is here. He's got some books you can look up, a new YouTube channel with 8,000 and climbing subscribers. So look those folks up online on YouTube. Our buddy Andy Hanna is here from 1486 Lab and the University of Pennsylvania. And Cansu Canca is here from the Institute for Experiential AI, which is part of Northeastern University out there in Massachusetts. What is responsible AI? First of all, I would like to dedicate this show to my good buddy. I learned today he passed away, Rick Sherman. He actually taught at Northeastern. So talk about closing a loop here. One of the nicest guys I ever met. He was the hardest working consultant in business, and he passed away apparently just about a year ago. I heard from his partner today. So this show's for you, buddy. He was a regular here on our radio shows, and it's just a super cool guy. So, and he would talk about this kind of stuff. Ethics. We're going to talk about ethics. So I'm going to steal everyone's thunder. I'm going to say the most important thing you can do to practice responsible AI is every time you launch an AI initiative, you document what is the purpose of this initiative? What are we trying to accomplish? How are we going to accomplish it? And then over time, once a quarter, once a year, perhaps, depending on the cadence, you look at the results and say, are we achieving what we thought we would achieve? We're trying to lower bias in loans, for example. We're trying to get better customer service for our customers out there. Are we achieving what we thought we wanted to achieve? If the answer is no, change something. If the answer is yes, good job, keep going. Apart from that, it's going to take policies, it's going to take rules, it's going to take adherence. And what they talk about at the Institute for Experiential AI, and I'll go ladies first here, I guess, and hand it over to Cansu here in a second, is what they say is human in the loop. So I always joke about the media and how the narrative is always wrong. The media narrative about AI seems to be, oh, it's going to take away jobs, it's going to control everything, we'll be answering to the AI overlords, all this kind of stuff. That is very much inaccurate. AI that does not have human control and shepherding is going to go off the rails pretty fast. If you don't ask me, look up Tay and Microsoft when they tried to do that a few years ago. It didn't go so well. It was a chatbot on Twitter that started spewing racial epithets at people right out the gate. They were like, whoa, shut it down, shut it down. Yeah, so lessons learned there. But Cansu, I'll throw it over to you from the Institute for Experiential AI. How do you define responsible AI? How can people do AI responsibly?
Thank you, Eric. I'm a philosopher, and I think definition is like one of the hardest things that you can ask a philosopher. So thanks for starting with me.
You bet.
So let me go back to what you said. What is responsible AI? Where we have responsible people, we have responsible ways of acting. But is there responsible AI? And actually, yes, you're right. Responsible AI is a shorthand. We are not talking about an AI system that is responsible, but we are talking about developing and deploying AI systems responsibly. So the responsibility invariably falls within humans, not on the AI system itself.
Right.
And on the humans throughout the AI's life cycle, from the moment that you have the idea of this is a good AI, this would be a good place where we use AI system, this would create more value, to the point where you have already released the AI system and you are monitoring it. You should be monitoring it, as you just said, and check whether the system does what it is supposed to do. At the core of the responsible AI is the question of making sure that the AI systems we create, we develop, we deploy are good. That's really just at that, right? Like, and the definition of good, of course, here holds a huge work. What we mean by good? Well, we mean AI system that does not harm individuals or society, that does good for individuals and society, that does not create further inequalities in the society, so that furthers us in the fair society goal, and AI systems that help us keep our agency, keep our individuality. So when you say, human in the loop, are they going to take over? AI systems are going to take over, or are they going to be there for us? Are we going to be controlling them? I think neither is the right answer. The answer is that we should be collaborating with AI systems, because we create AI systems where humans are not doing a great job. We have very hard time. Our brains have hard time with a lot of information, a lot of variables. That's why we need AI systems. So there is value in building AI systems. And we cannot say that AI system gives me a recommendation and I'm just going to say yes or no. This is how I control. Well, that's like falling back to our own biases, isn't it? So what we want to be able to say is that we understand the AI system, how it reaches its decisions. We collaborate with it irrationally, intelligently, and augment ourselves, our ways of being around, doing business, doing work, helping the society.
Yeah, that's great. I think I love that you're a philosopher. I'm a philosopher as well. And so I think about these things and think about the meaning of words and what we're trying to say. And, just real quick, in American culture and Western culture in particular, I've counseled some people on this over the years. You have to watch out for the language that you use, because a lot of times in advertising, companies will use language to imply that they have what they don't have, or they use language to sort of fortify the image of their company when they're not like that at all. So it's like, if you say, oh, it's responsible AI in the Western world, I'm going to think, you're probably not very responsible. If you're saying you're responsible, I don't believe you. So there is that interesting dynamic in our culture, because we have so much advertising. We have so much media everywhere constantly promoting, this is what we're doing. This is what we're doing. That's why I say nouns and verbs, folks. Talk about the nouns and verbs, leave out the adjectives and the adverbs to explain what you're doing. And if I hear you correctly, Cansu, and I'll throw it over to David after this, you're basically saying careful is as careful does, and you need to document what you're doing and document your policies, and then just have a rational discussion around that, right, Cansu?
Absolutely. But in addition to that, again, being an ethicist, being a philosopher, I would say, it's not just about documenting the right things to do. A lot of the time, the exciting thing in AI ethics is that we don't know, it's a complex problem. Just AI is complex, AI ethics is complex, responsible AI is complex. So we need to work at it. Like, it's not just like follow the rules, but as ethicists, what we do is we look at it as a puzzle. How do you make this system fair? Just going at it, trying to figure it out, trying to make it better, iterate on it. So it's not just documenting, but striving for better and trying to become better. Looking at it in an innovative way, even when you're coming at it from the ethics perspective, not just from the AI innovator perspective.
Yeah, that's very interesting. That's a good point. David Linthicum, I'll bring you in, our cloud expert. You've been building these systems for a long time. You told a story before the show about how you were dragged into court to explain how an AI system works. So you do have to have answers for these things. Go ahead, tell us.
Yeah. First thing, that was a great explanation that we just heard. The first thing we have to understand, that are we using this for the appropriate use case? That's the first level of responsibility. So everybody goes to ethics and biases and things like that. And I don't think that's going to be the case each and every time. So in many instances, it's going to be misapplied. I think that's the single most common reason I see AI things fail, is because they're trying to solve the wrong problems with AI. You're taking the ethics stuff out of it. So is it used in the right responsible place? If it's doing loan applications, do we actually need an AI system to make that happen? So we have to ask ourselves, it's not that we can, it's if we should, if something should occur or not. And this is the appropriate technology to make it happen. And if it is the appropriate technology to make it happen, you have to make sure that, you got to remember, I'm the geek here, that there's enough infrastructure in terms of security and governance, audit capabilities to ensure that we're doing the right things in coming to the most accurate and unbiased conclusion. You can't eliminate bias completely, but you have to have the auditing capabilities, the continuous learning capabilities that get you to the best solution to get you to the best answers out of these systems that you can have. And so you need to have different people on this team. It's funny, it's like all the AI systems that I work on as an architect, I have a ethics specialist that sits on the team, and that person is responsible for dealing with the bias stuff, the technical stuff we're dealing with. But I'm sorry, what issues, what implementations, what process needs to be put in place to ensure that this thing doesn't go off the rails? And I always tell people who take my architect class that you need to build this system as if you're going to be testifying in court, because many instances you are. You're going to be brought in to explain what you did, because the system is assumed to have some sort of an inconsistency in it, some sort of a bias that may damage somebody. And they're going to bring the lead architect in there to explain how that system is not biased and how you did the, dotted your I's and crossed your T's to built a system that's completely right.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You do have to dot I's, cross T's, be able to explain it. I sit around a lot when I'm lying in bed, and instead of just pondering subjects, I find myself explaining things and then re-explaining them and imagining, well, what if someone says this? Then how would you explain it? And you do a lot of that. And it's good because it kind of helps you navigate around the hard corners, I suppose, is one way to put it. Because in order to have any communication, there must be context that is agreed upon. We must both know, relatively speaking, what we're talking about to be able to use terms and phrases to explain something. And a lot of times, especially in a court of law, you're dealing with people who may have no idea how this stuff works. So you really have to kind of lay it out and show a diagram and say, the input comes in here. This is the training data. This is the inference that it makes. And then, to unwind that can be a challenge. A lot of the AI systems we've seen over the years were black boxes. One of them is today. ChatGPT is a black box today. So it's hard to explain how a black box works, right, David?
It absolutely is. And the thing is, sometimes I almost figure I need to bring puppets into those situations. And you get really good at explaining very complex technical topics in ways that laymen can understand. If you think about it, looking at what AI systems are, generative AI being an instance of that, extremely complex with all these inner workings, things, generative adversarial networks and how they work with, different sorts of, you can't get to that level. You really need to get to the levels of what's the functionality of this stuff, how it works, and where it can go off the rails, how it should be monitored, how it should be governed. And then people get to that and they go, okay, you're putting in the places, you're putting in the consistency, the guardrail to make sure that it doesn't do these bad things, that it doesn't become a bad actor. That it doesn't end up attacking human beings or being biased against human beings. And that has to be kind of core to the message. And so people who understand AI should be really good at explaining it at cocktail parties.
That's a great metric. And we have a question from the audience, and perfect timing. I'll throw it over to Andy Hanna, who I'm sure knows a thing or two about ethics and responsible AI. And of course, 1486 Labs serves as a liaison or a shepherd between data purchasers and data sellers. And guess what? Here's a question that just came in across the transmitter from our live studio audience. If I'm using a lot of third-party data in my AI solution, how do I know there isn't bias in that data? Is there some sort of seal of approval? That's when you talk to someone like Andy Hanna from 1486 Labs. Andy, what do you think?
Yeah, I think determining the quality of data is a really challenging thing, right? Because we think about things like completeness and accuracy and comparability, timeliness, but that all relates to a specific set of data as it relates to a specific use case. I think what we need to start thinking about is how those data sets are put together. So the organization itself, are they giving us transparency about how those data sets are built? What the sources are is specifically a need. Like oftentimes we can buy data sets, but not really understand where the original source is. And sometimes we can't even understand how it's put together. So I think that's going to add to transparency around the data quality, and especially third-party data, in terms of our ability to get the most value out of it, because the bias in these models are often coming from the data itself. If we're building those models off of historic data, and that historic data was used to make biased decisions in the past, it's going to repeat itself. I think one of the interesting things that was mentioned earlier is about purpose. I think you said it at the top of the hour, Eric. is that we need to think about the purpose of why we're putting these systems in place, and what is the intent of the people that are going to use these AI systems. And with that, then we can start to understand where bias might seep in, or where we might be hurting a particular portion of the population. In that case, what we need to do better is teach. We need to teach our students. We need to teach our employees how best to use those systems, how to put them together, how to put the right data into the systems in order to get the outcomes that we want, that are fair, unbiased, and ethical.
Yeah, those are all excellent points too. And I think the teaching is really key, right? Because, well, what did Mark Twain say? Prejudice or common sense or prejudice, one of the two, is that set of values you've adopted by the age of 18, right? And so depending upon where you grew up, you can have a different value set, and people can disagree on how to do business in certain environments. So to have an understanding of that and to document that, it kind of gets back to what I was saying at the top of the hour, but it's kind of difficult. So where do you capture that information? I think it's when you launch an AI project. That's where you want to document what you're trying to accomplish, what data sets you're using. You don't have to do too much, but at least explain, why did you choose this data? What do you expect to get from this data? All these kinds of things at least help the human be more aware as to go through the process of executing the job, right, Andy?
That's right. Yeah, I think that the more transparency that we can bring to the data sets that we're using right now, we often think about managing our internal data because that's what's most plentiful to us, and we augment that with external and third-party data. And we need to start thinking about that more as an asset. It still strikes me as very interesting that we can't put that data sets on the balance sheet as an asset. I think our accounting system is well behind in that. So once we're forced to both value and understand the data, it forces us to get put more governance around those assets and how we use them.
Yeah, and it gets into topics like data fabric, for example. So we're still in an era when most information systems rely on a database. The more advanced companies out there are using what is referred to as a data fabric, which is significantly more complex. It requires more investment. Obviously, only larger organizations can get serious about that. But now, of course, Microsoft has rolled out Microsoft Fabric. I have not taken a briefing on that, so I can't go into detail about what gets in there, but we do have systems that are now more able to leverage metadata. For example, like when you load a data set, it could have in one of the about fields, this data is only to be used in marketing in North America or something like that. There are ways to do that, but you always have to remember in the handoffs, does everyone read the instructions? Does everyone read the instructions when they build toys for their kids? Probably not. They probably just go right in and start using stuff. So the more you can infuse these little tidbits, the better. And AI is good at that. But don't touch that dial. I'll be right back. You're listening to Inside Analysis.
Recording stopped.
All right. Well, that segment flew by in record time. All right. I think I'll come back to you, Cansu, when we come back. But that's a really good point. I'm thinking to myself, it's probably going to be AI delivered suggestions that keep us on track. So as you load, let's say in your system, in your AI environment, as you try to load a data set, you're going to get a little message that says, are you sure you want to use this? What are you going to use it for? It should only be used for X, Y, and Z. That kind of thing is very helpful. And that's what I've found AI can do that is very helpful, is make suggestions to the human being who's working on stuff, right? Now you have to figure out ways to bake that in. But it's already happening. I mean, Google and Gmail have been doing that for a while. So other companies have done that. I'll throw it over to you before we come back. Cansu, as the ethicist at the AI Institute over there, do you get brought in on all projects or on only certain projects? Or how do you actually manifest your work in these real world engagements?
Whenever you want me to talk about it.
Okay, I'll throw it back at you right when we come back then. That's good.
Sure.
She's ready to rock and roll, man. She's Turkish. Don't mess with the Turks. You heard about the Young Turks. Don't mess with them. My buddy, one of my best friends, he's a developer. His name is Evren, and his sister's name is Evrim. And I think it's like the universe and everything or something like
Yes.
that.
Everyone.
Isn't that right?
Yeah. Is he at Google?
What's that?
Is he at Google?
No, he's at I don't know where he is these days. He was at Salesforce for a while.
Right.
Developers, man. I mean, Copilot is crazy too. Copilot, I mean, it's coming so fast. I was talking to my buddy Eve Mulkers this morning, and he was saying how he's using ChatGPT and Bard to write Python code all day long. He said it like saves him half the time it used to take to do something, because I say, all right, give me a script for this, and it won't be perfect, but it'll be close. And then you just like tidy it up, and boom, you're off to the races. I mean, really, it's like this stuff, you got to use this stuff, man. Use it or get bowled over by it, I think is what's going to happen here.
Well, I think there's a lot of fear. I mean, even at the university level.
Yeah.
So the first thing that people worry about is, plagiarism, right?
Right.
Or using, and so we have to teach them how to use it responsibly.
Right. Well, they got to write shorter papers when they're in class. Right.
You got to ask more complex questions.
That's true too. Yeah. More complex questions. Oh, homework, dude. When I was a kid and then they gave me work to take home, I was like, hold on a second. What are you talking about? Like, I come here all day in this stupid school, and you want me to take this stuff home and work at home? Like, no, that's home. This is school. My parents work. See, different things. Work, school, home, all different.
They raise you to blur the work and
yeah, that's exactly right.
From the early age.
I guess so. Yeah. Then I remember one time my father tried to get us into CCD class, and any Catholics out there know what a CCD class is. I was just dreadful. And I'll never forget, I was probably 8 years old, and I'll never forget this lady putting a stack of paper on my desk. And the exact thought that went through my mind was like, this lady's crazy. Like, I don't do my regular homework. You think I'm going to do this? Like, there's no chance of this getting done. Like, I just want this lady to understand. No way. CCD, it's like Christian school after school. So you go to school and then you go to school after school, and like, that right there is that's a non-starter, as my mother would say.
Join the movement and go red.
Welcome back to Inside Analysis. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
Take us to the future.
All right, folks, back here on Inside Analysis with an all-star cast talking about what is responsible AI. And Cansu, I'm going to throw this one over to you from the Institute for Experiential AI. That means human-in-the-loop people, Northeastern University, where my buddy Rick Sherman used to teach. Small world. Cansu, I'll throw it over to you. We already heard from David a little tip from his experience that the ethicist would be on the team, of a team of people pulled together to build some project. One person's job is to, let's think about what we're doing here. Is it ethical or is it not? Where could we run into trouble? Not just legal trouble, but ethical trouble. So I'll ask you, Cansu, how does your work manifest in client engagements?
Yeah, I'm always very happy to hear these type of things from others and not me saying it. Ethicists cannot be sitting outside. We are not supposed to be at a board and trying to look over, police you and tell you what to do and what not to do. No, it's supposed to be a collaborative work. So the way that we are working with clients and the way that we encourage clients to build governance structures in is to create a workflow, to create an AI innovation process that involves ethics and ethicists in the whole innovation lifecycle. So it's a collaboration. Just having ethicists is not sufficient. You have to have a competent multidisciplinary team that includes ethicists, that includes technical folks who work on responsible AI, also design people, for example, because you are going to create a user interface. Creating a user interface is an ethically loaded question, but ethicists are not going to be the ones who are going to be building the user interface. So they collaborate with developers, they collaborate with designers. What we do is to ensure that there is this workflow, there is this process. And in order to keep this process running for every AI system that goes through the development cycle, that goes through procurement cycle or deployment cycle, you have to have governance structures. So we put in place governance structures, which include what I call the playbook, having the guidelines, having tools, having principles, operationalizable principles, not just aspirations, having a general integration of this AI innovation process into the other operations of your company, and having the right people. And having the right people, by the way, does not mean that you have to turn everyone into ethicists or computer scientists at the same time. What you want to really do is to create sort of like this network of people in the organization, where you have many people who understand, who are aware of the ethical problems so that they can flag them as they see them. Then fewer people, one layer up, let's say, whom I call ethics respondents, who can actually look up at the playbook, look up at the existing organization structure and solve the problems or escalate the questions. And then you need to have your proper philosophers, ethicists who deal with the dilemmas. Like if you really hit a hard trade-off, how do you get out of this hard question? How do you deal with these dilemmas? And for that, your real ethicists, your philosophers should be working together again with the broader responsible AI context, right? Like the designers, the lead designers, the leadership in design, in development, in business decision making, and have these values put in practice, properly put in practice, and not just stay in ideas.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I mean, and you just reminded me of something too, which is I'm sure at the beginning of the engagement, when you're beginning some process, you want the ethicist in there and say, okay, here's where things could go wrong. We could misuse this information. There could be a bad judgment that results from it. People could lose their jobs. When people understand the harsh implications that could result from a particular decision, that's when they kind of wake up. I mean, most people are pretty reasonable, I think. We just need to be taught, right? Or one of my favorite expressions, an old one, you don't hear it too much, says man doesn't need to be taught so much as reminded, right? Because we already learned things, but you have to be reminded of things. And that's where an ethicist, I think, can really come in handy to say, hey, remember, guys, on the front end, this is where things can go wrong, because now everyone on the team is on alert and can watch for that, can look for that in the data, can look for that in the process, can look for that in the end results. If you talk to the customer who had a bad experience, this is what the ethicist was talking about a couple of weeks ago. So now I can go back and say, hey, yeah, remember that thing you said? Yeah, it just happened today. That's a really, really good answer. Cansu, thank you so much. David Linthicum, I'll throw this one over to you. I had a call last week with the CTO for Kong, which of course is like an API gateway. And he had a couple really interesting quotes. One, he said, all traffic is API traffic these days. It used to be a subset. Now there's a ton of traffic of APIs. And he talked about how in their API gateway, they can actually enforce governance around LLMs, because you're going through the gateway to get to the LLM, you're coming back through the LLM through the gateway to get to the user. So he said that's where you can actually bake in some protocols like no politics, for example. I asked Bard something the other day just to see what it would say. I said, how many electoral votes does Georgia and Arizona have? And it thought for a second, it said, elections are very complex, and please use Google for this. They were like, we don't want to touch it. don't even go near that. That's a guardrail. That is a guardrail that has been baked in now at a very foundational level for Google Bard or Gemini, where they don't want you asking it about stuff like that. That's a guardrail. The guardrail could be any number of places, but I was interested and curious to hear that the gateway itself could be a guardrail. But what do you think about all that, David?
I think that's a great example of what governance should be. Your ability to put guardrails and usage limits around people who are accessing this resource, which is in some instances is not going to give you the answer that you want them to provide. And so we're going to put a limit in the way in which we're going to use it, whether that's getting at just your financial data that's associated with you, whether or not that's and you're not asking ethical questions, you're not able to introduce poisoning into the knowledge models, where you say everybody who's named Dave Linthicum, please pay them $10,000 a month, things like that. And we get in this tiered kind of a structure, which I think where all this stuff is going, where we're able to put these specialized layers that are just dealing with governance. And by the way, those systems unto themselves are going to be LLM based, and they're going to be AI based, things like that, because that's just a mechanism to enforce these sorts of things. And I think that's a great place for it to be, because you're going to have volatility that occurs in the governance layer. Lots of things are going to change over time, and you're in essence putting that into a domain. We're not putting it back into the larger LLM, where we have to reprogram and retranslate the system and retrain the data for every kind of governance policy that we want to implement. So we're putting it in a small language model that's able to do it in a much more tactical way. So I think I would applaud something like that. as a good architectural option. Instead, everybody wants to push stuff into the LLM. I don't think that's a good option. We're making that thing way too complex. We're making it very difficult to govern into itself. And so the ability to put layers on the outside that do the governance, that do the security is a much better, much easier to deal with approach.
Yeah, I think so too. And Andy, I'll throw it over to you. You know, one of the most clever things I ever heard was a guy who gave a speech on security. This is in Malaysia years ago, an Indian gentleman, and he said, lunch is not a food. And I laughed because I got the joke. He's basically saying lunch is an event at which you eat any number of kinds of food. And yes, food is integral to lunch, but you don't even need that necessarily. If you're Mad Men, you would have liquid lunch, right? So they're like, the point is that governance is not one thing. Security is not one thing. There are layers of these things which you can bake in. And of course, at a university, I'm sure you folks are very concerned about LLMs and students just using it to write papers and things of that nature. So you have to come up with rules and guidelines and then remind students of the rules and enforce once in a while. But it's a process, right, Andy?
I think it is. I think we're very cautionary right now at the university level, and that we're worried about how, you know, these technologies can be used. And I think we're just starting to get around to the view that, hey, if we can teach our students how to use LLMs as an example, generative AI, you know, to increase productivity, to, you know, for idea generation, for content creation, for communication. These are incredible capabilities. And if we can put the right teaching and the right programs in place, that our students can come out of university being able to actually use these tools to make a significant difference at the organizations that they're going to. That, though, I'm not, you know, that's the power of it. But I completely agree with David that on the governance side, that we need to teach that at the same time. We need to make sure that they know how to reverse engineer what they've done and understand the consequences if they put the, you know, bad data into the AI manufacturing process. You're going to get some results that might be very detrimental to a certain part of the population. So I think we have to teach both sides how better to use these. Very simple example, prompt engineering. Let's teach prompt engineering, and let's, to get to the right answer to the question, to then audit the answer, and then protect those who might be harmed by saying what could go wrong, putting the humans around the problem, both from the problem definition to the AI generation to telling the story at the end, making sure that governance goes all the way through that, effectively your manufacturing process.
Mm-hmm. That's an excellent point. And John, Sue, I'll throw it back over to you. This is a process. It's a learning process. And one thing I think that people should appreciate is that it's hard to untrain a model. So as you've trained a model, that's why we're talking about these architectures where you have your, let's say, your vector database. That's where you're putting your embeddings of your business language, of your documentation and your rules and your policies, et cetera, on your end. And so ideally, you only want to use the LLM for its text generative capability. You want the facts to come from your information. And that's what they call a RAG approach, a retrieval augmented generation approach, where you're telling it to look at the important stuff that you have provided it and then use the text generation just to kind of fill in the gaps, essentially. And I will say that summarization is an incredible use case for this Gen AI stuff. You could take big honking documents that are very complex, feed them into an AI model, and just start asking questions like you would if you had a great teacher in your room. Oh, how does this work? How does that work again? It's very good at that stuff. And I mean, that is massively going to implicate how things get taught and what you learn. I mean, think about how you forget phone numbers now because they're in your phone all the time. I mean, are we going to forget rules and procedures because they're just in the LLM all the time and it's going to ask it? We have to ask ourselves these questions and remind ourselves that you have to stay focused on stuff. John-Sue, what do you think?
That's a mouthful. You went around a lot of topics. So I think going back to what David said earlier, and you and David, both of you emphasized the purpose of why you're using something, right? So yes, summarization is great. And there are ways of making use of LLMs to do sort of like these mundane tasks that are hard to do, but not very, it's not very intellectually interesting. And if something can just bring me the actual information that I need, that's fantastic. But of course, the context matters. Like, am I doing the sandboxing matters? Like, did we do enough to check whether these systems make errors that are unexpected, errors that we did not see coming, even with all of these guardrails in place? And the other thing is, in which context are we using them? I work with Interpol, for example. Working with the criminal justice is extremely difficult because we just released, I think this is the week that they are doing the big release in Singapore for our toolkit for responsible AI innovation toolkit for law enforcement. But basically, working with criminal justice data is extremely difficult when you talk about bias and existing data set, my own materials that I trust. Well, your own materials that you trust in criminal justice, they are loaded with biases that is already embedded in them. So should we be trusting? What type of summaries can we trust? What type of information can we trust? And remind you, these type of biases are not misrepresentation of the world. This is the representation of the correct representation of the world in the sense that those biases exist and they are a part of our social structure. The misrepresentation part is that they are unjust. They have not, they are the way that they have been, the discrimination that is going on in the world has been unjust. But the data represents what's going on in the world, which is unjust. So how do you clean up that? How do you deal with these type of biases? And should you use systems that we haven't properly sandboxed, we haven't properly tested in areas where the error is extremely delicate? So I want to go one more steps to the accuracy question, for example. We keep talking about, is the system accurate? But what are we really trying, from the ethics perspective, what is the question we are asking? It doesn't, like, one thing is that how accurate the system is, generally speaking. The much more important thing to me is that where is the false positive and where is the false negative? If we are talking about criminal justice, I don't want to have a high false positive rate where I mistakenly label innocent people as criminals. If we are talking about treatable cancer cases, I don't want to mistakenly label people as false negative. So where does the impact fall? What could you have done if you did it differently? So we have to, in thinking about accuracy, in thinking about risk, in thinking about even using tools like summarization, what is our data? What are we worried about? What is who is the community that's going to be impacted?
That's right. Those are excellent points. I have to say, hats off, because you made a really, really good point to differentiate between the kinds of use cases and when a false negative is bad and when it's really bad, when a false positive is bad and when it's really bad. You have to be careful about that stuff. And you see this all the time with credit card fraud. I will say they are getting better and better at being able to analyze this stuff. And thank goodness, you know, my wife one day bought 2 tickets to Nigeria. I'm like, honey, did you buy 2 tickets to Nigeria? No, I didn't think that you would. I'm like, no, that's fraud. I got to call it. That's absolutely wrong. We got a break coming up here, but one last point. We had a great comment from an attendee in our live audience. It writes, are AI fakes impossible to differentiate from reality? Well, I mean, to a certain extent, yeah. Now, the big guys are all talking about putting a sort of watermark on AI generated or modified work, which is good. That's a step in the right direction, but it's still hard to do, man. I've seen some deep fakes recently that were really, really compelling. And boy, you got to rely on your trust and your critical thinking even more, folks, but that's probably good news. Anyway, don't shut down. We'll be right back here listening to Inside Analysis.
Recording stopped.
All right, great job.
So my question is, when do we start thinking about AI as a member of the team as opposed to a tool?
That's I'll bring you in to do that. That's great.
I think it obviously is a tool, but the more and more that it starts to learn and become a participant in the conversation, it can be like anybody else's opinion to some extent. And so thinking about it, it's like not trying to be accurate. I think, it's performant, it's contributory.
Yeah, that's great.
Good point.
I don't know if I mentioned to you, Andy, I may have my buddy from Optima, Lou Simon is his name. Super smart guy. He's very, very forward looking on these LLMs and adversarial training and all this stuff. He's like, yeah, we think we're still in charge. They're like training each other now. So you better watch out. But he was telling me he created a whole C-suite in his GPT, where he's got a finance GPT, a marketing, sales, and he has them hash out business plans and like disagree with each other. And he like reads the reviews and stuff. I'm like, dude, That's pretty deep. That's it, but it's interesting because you can throw it again. You give it a document and say, "Now, give me this take on it. Give me that take on it." It's great for vetting. Like, remember the SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. That whole thing. It's great for that stuff. Give me a SWOT analysis on this. Boom, done. I mean, really, it's remarkable how good this stuff can be. And I know it's just a system of weightings. We had Usama Fayyad on the show a couple times at the start of the year, and he's like, "Oh, it's not that scientifically interesting. It's just a system of weightings." I'm like, "Yeah, but it does seem to understand rules. Like if you tell it write a sonnet about XYZ, it'll follow the structure of a sonnet. Like boom, boom, boom. There you go. If you tell it, give a SWOT assessment, it'll probably give you a SWOT assessment. Now, it does get semantic things wrong on occasion. I asked it about one thing. It's like, no, 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 it's this. I'm like, no, it's that. He goes, oh, okay. Well, it was that, but now it's not. And I'm like, okay. Like has a whole debate with you. It's fun. It's, cross swords with the AI engine. But it cannot pick up your groceries and it cannot fix your toilet.
It'll have your groceries delivered though.
That is true, but it is going to be a person for a while at least.
I don't know. It could be.
It has to be inside a robot.
Yeah.
We have robots running around Pittsburgh delivering stuff all the time.
Really?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one in San Francisco just got attacked and burned.
San Francisco. I have the best story about San Francisco. I have to use this at a conference or a talk sometime because it was just priceless. When I brought my my then 8-year-old to get her passport, and we're walking past all the poor, God bless them, all the drug dealers out in the street, and half of them are like conked over, passed out, probably going to die any minute now. And a cop car comes rolling up behind us. And I looked at my daughter. I'm like, all right, let's see what happens now. And the cop car rolls right up next to us. I mean, like right next to us, rolls down the window and he yells at this vagrant standing next to me. He goes, hey, you, would you please stop stealing video games from department stores? We know it's you. I was like, I just watched a cop ask a robber to not steal. Like that's what has happened in San Francisco. Like, we're not going to arrest you because they're just going to let you go. We don't want to deal with the hassle, but they're trying to shame him into stop stealing video games. That is modern day San Francisco.
Your flu shot. Learn more at heart.org/flu.
Welcome back to Inside Analysis. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, folks, back here on Inside Analysis, talking to several experts today. We're so excited. We've got Andy Hanna from 1486 Labs, David Linthicum, formerly of Deloitte, now on his own, doing all sorts of great work. Check out his YouTube channel that's rocking and rolling. And Cansu Canca from the Northeastern University Institute for Experiential AI. And Andy, right before right during the break, I guess, you made a really good point about when are we going to start looking to AI as part of our team? Tell us what your thoughts about that.
Yeah, I've often thought about this as thinking about AI as an extension of ourselves. Like it's a super processor, right? That in Professor Agarwal's view, reduces the cost of predictions, the processing power, the data, et cetera. And so lately, though, I've been starting to think about it more about, hey, can this be a member of our team? Right. So should we be thinking about AI as being contributing ideas, contributing predictions, asking about the impact of prescriptions? And then just like somebody sitting around a conference table say, well, that's an interesting point, but that's an interesting point, but. So we often think about it and oftentimes from a negative perspective, because popular press likes to show the negative power that could happen because of AI. I think we need a little bit more positive press about what could positively happen if we consider this technology, this avatar, if you will, as an extension of our team or ourselves.
Yeah, that's great. And we had a really good question come in from the audience, so I'm going to throw this one out there too. And I'll throw it over first to Cansu and then over to David to comment on. This is a good one. One attendee is writing, when you want to purposely bias an output, such as giving veterans a first shot at some limited number of something, is that something that would best be done outside the model or somewhere in the model? Or in other words, where would you actually put that into place? That's a great question. It depends upon the use case, but you could definitely have that in a RAG model, for example, as one of the policies to look for. Or you can have it as the last step that a human being takes. Because remember, you don't have to just let the AI decide something. You can have the AI come up with a recommendation that the person either use or not use, but you don't have to automate that process. You can. But anyway, Janju, I'll throw it over to you. What do you think about that, Jansu?
I think the question is excellent, and your answer is also excellent. When to do it, it depends. It depends on the use case. The most important thing here is that being explicit about what is going on. Because if I know that the system is already biased towards veterans, let's say, for giving them the first shot, then I would use it accordingly. If I don't know, and I am then making a fairness decision myself, I may overcompensate, I may decide to double it. And I think this is also a very nice question to sort of like go to a part of the discussion that I think is very important to address always. Like when we talk about bias, it's not always unjust bias. Giving a priority to veterans in a certain circumstances might be the fair outcome. So when we say we have a fair model, we are optimizing for fairness, we need to really define what are we talking about. In political philosophy, where the fairness theories come from, we have multiple definitions that conflict with each other. So your equal treatment and equal outcome could be both fair given a certain situation, but they will not give you the same result. You might say that we should prioritize vulnerable groups. You could also say that we should make sure that everyone is benefited. They may not give you the same result. You may say we need to get the best outcome, or you may say that we need to make sure that the worst off gets the best outcome. Again, different results, but all of them could be fair. So there is no agreed upon definition of fairness, but there is a huge literature about what are the most relevant fairness approaches, and what did we as a society agreed upon in given sectors? So in the military context, this is going to differ from the healthcare context, from the insurance context, from the criminal justice context. And one thing that DoD wrote, for example, was when they released their principles for responsible AI, they said fairness is intentionally excluded because we want, as a military, unfair advantage. Wrong wording. You always want to be fair, except the definition of fairness will differ in the context of military, for example. But you never want an unfair military. That's absolutely wrong. That's why we have laws of just war and all of those type of things in the literature. So I think this is a very long answer, but I think it's very important, because thinking about bias and fairness, first, in my team, again, multidisciplinary team, we first look at the circumstances. What is the use case? What kind of a playing field are we in? Every one of our non-technical playing fields, sectors, are unfair in some way or another. So what is the unfairness that we are already dealing with? Then looking at the model, looking at the technology. What is this model trying to do? What is this technology trying to do? What kind of data is this using? What should be aware of and pay attention to? And what is the right way of creating this model? And then hand over, making sure that the people who are going to use the model understand what you are giving them, making sure you have the relevant user interface, and making sure that they know what is the confidence level, what is the accuracy level, again, with the false positive, false negatives. When is this appropriate to use? And what fairness metrics or what fairness considerations you may want to plug in after the system gives you a recommendation. Again, if you think about it from the law enforcement perspective, it may be accurate that certain areas are high crime, but the question will become for the human, do I send the police car or do I send social workers? What is the relevant way of dealing with the issue? So
that's excellent. And I think our audience now understands why you want an AI ethicist on your team. You've done a good job of breaking that down. I'll throw it over to David and then Andy to comment on this too. David, go ahead.
Yeah, it was an excellent answer. One of the things I would do as an architect is put the biases outside of the LLMs. In other words, if you're going to introduce some bias into the LLM that's going to select one group of people, for example, over another, that's going to be very confusing, since we have an auditing system and a bias elimination system that's running through the knowledge models and eliminating that stuff. In fact, that was actually a use case that I ran into. So in other words, they were trying to introduce bias to pick one group over another, and the bias auditing tool will go through there and eliminate that from the knowledge model. So what I would do is decouple it from the system. So in other words, you're getting data that's completely sanitized and fair as it possibly can be. Then you're introducing bias in terms of the information that's consumed out of the LLM. That's normally the way that the knowledge workers out there would do it, but you could certainly introduce it into the model. But that's dangerous because you are introducing something that's non-logical in the model, because we're telling it to have a particular bias for a particular reason that they want. That's not going to be something that's going to be easy understood and easily managed in the Gen AI knowledge models.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So the bias that you want to introduce, if you want a program to lean towards one group or another group, David is saying probably keep that outside where you can actually understand what has happened, and you just you draw the line of demarcation. Okay, we gave it to this person because of that reason. You have to have some audit trail. The point is, if you stick it inside that model, A, your bias removal process might just strip it back out again, so you lost that way. But B, it could be hard to find. There was actually an article I'll mention maybe in the podcast bonus segment about Anthropic and these sleeper cells. I was like, what on earth is this? But Andy, you had a really good example too on this particular topic. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, as you know, Eric, I co-founded a company called OTHA, which is a machine learning company that focused on higher education, helping universities enroll the best fit students and help shape their class. That company is now part of Liaison International, where I remain the president of their AI division there. And so this is a really cool situation where maybe a different technology and different perspective shows how we can use bias to help a university. So let's say that you want to diversify, you want to increase the diversification of the student body, but historically you have not enrolled a significant portion of an underrepresented part of the population, whether it be something related to ethnicity or whether it relate to income, whether it relate to rural versus urban, whatever it may be, you want to increase the diversity. Well, the machine learning can tell you the probability of every individual within that population, within let's say an application group, of who's most likely to enroll. If you just use the model at a global level, it's always going to look for those who have enrolled in the past, which may be a non-diversified group. But so what we can look at is the individual population. So it's underrepresented population and who has the highest probability within those subpopulations, and focus our resources on those subpopulations to get them to enroll in the university, and therefore diversifying the student body. And then if you feed that back into the model, it'll learn, it'll help you enroll more of that diversity over time.
Yeah, that's a great story. That's a really, really good example. And again, it helps people start to wrap their head around how these things are working, because a model is trained on whatever you train it on, and then that's what it knows. This is why I tell people you got to be careful what you train these models on, because it's hard to unlearn stuff. I mean, you might be able to just tear it down and start over again, and you don't want to do that because it's expensive to build. They're expensive to train. So you want to have a separation of concerns, and then, as David was suggesting, whatever you want the bias to be, you have that somewhere outside the system that's still auditable. But anyway, folks, podcast bonus segment is coming up next. You have been listening to Inside Analysis.
February.
Recording stop.
David, I have a question.
All right. If you guys could stick around for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Fine.